Welcome to episode 33 of the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram, and today's topic is the rise and fall of fantasy states. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. As always, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review my show on iTunes. That'll help people find us, whether you're a fan of one of my interviews or you like the show. It's the best way to help share it out is to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And also, I've had some questions on how can we support you monetarily so you don't start getting advertising? The easiest way is if you go to my website, there are many links to affiliates, especially to Amazon. Even if you're not looking to buy the product that I've listed, if you use my links to get into Amazon and purchase whatever you want, whether it's the thing that I'm showing you or something else, Amazon will give me a portion of it to thank me for sending you to the site, but they will not charge you a dime extra. So it's really a good way where we can both succeed and we can help prevent having to go to an advertising model at some point with the show. Now, when I talk about a state and the rise, obviously I talk about when did it become a state. And I define that as the moment of time where there is enough excess materials in the state to the point where they start expanding territory. They start either acquiring local cities or moving out and securing raw materials that are important to the culture. Once they start doing this, they are a state. They have a defined form of government of some sort. A hierarchy will probably come before that. But when they have enough excess goods to where they're really trading and expanding, they become a state. And they're no longer a tribal nation, or however you want to think of a tribal nation. And from that date, and it will be obviously a random date, it'll probably be a year, like the Empire of Wickedness formed on the 47th day of the year of the Knitter's Bargain. And if that all makes sense in your world, that would be the start of a state. And it's good to know how they formed. You know, what was the impetus? Why did they begin? Perhaps it was to expand a religious idea. So you go through and you're starting to have excess good, you have a small drought, and you determine that you've had a famine caused by another wicked city next to you. So you form up an army and you go subjugate the city, you eradicate their temples, and you raise structures to your god, the more important god in the pantheon of local cultural gods. Or perhaps they're a different culture altogether. Perhaps you are trying to push them out of land that they've settled onto. Whatever the reason, what were the acts at the beginning of the state? And this is going to go a lot later on. You talk about cultural norms of what is acceptable and unacceptable in the state. If you start off very early with a religious mandate to war upon people, the longer that impetus stays with a culture, the more acceptable it becomes for the state to use that, especially against people who the state deems as heretics. And in the same way, not only are you talking about expanding lands, but everyone who lives in the territory of the state might not believe in the religion the same way you do. The state will probably look to centralize the religious beliefs. They will use those kinds of beliefs to try and squash enemies. So if they can tie the enemy to the heretical form of the religion, the king can now have the right to take his land where he might not have the authority to do that otherwise. And where he might have the power to do that, he might be afraid to use that power for fear of reprisal and uprising from people. I also like to look at golden ages of the states when I think about the rise and the fall. And you're really going to probably have multiple golden ages sort of peppered throughout. And this kind of ties back into history as well, too. Obviously, rise and fall is a subset of history. It's just, to me, the most important events. And societies and states sort of look like one of those silly biorhythm, up and down kind of sound wave looking things where they're never going directly up, they're never going directly down, and they're not in a straight line. They're having a good day, a bad day. And almost exclusively with people who think like humans. So whether you have humans or you have races that have human-like characteristics, golden ages are something that have always happened. If you were in the middle of a golden age, you will have people who will sit there and they'll talk about how kids today will be the downfall of civilization and they'll ruin civilization. They'll talk about, boy, back then it was so much better. That's just sort of a common thing you see. And part of it, I think, is sort of an evolutionary fear of things going bad. And so people are always prepping themselves. They're waiting for the worst outcomes to happen because if they are expecting them, they're more likely to be prepared for them. The more likely they are to be prepared for a bad time, the more likely they are to survive it. And a lot of times, if states don't have that kind of mentality where it is a golden age and your agriculture is booming, the food supply is great, your military force is the best it's ever been, if you hit a good dip afterwards in your economy, it might lead to the destruction of your state. If you have a famine, it can lead to the destruction of your state. So states that especially survive for long periods of time usually have the mentality that good times were in the past. Okay, the next part I want to talk about is the collapse of the state. What precipitated it? Was it just poor planning and a series of events? It could be that. Perhaps it was an invasion from a bigger or larger state who swallows the smaller state. Think of countless states, the Carthaginians, people who got in the way of empires. Their states went away and sometimes never came back. Or if they came back, they're in a different form. And what was the cause of the collapse of the state? Was it war? Was it just a changing in the way people thought? And that state in its form no longer mattered, or if it mattered, it was no longer important. Maybe something like the Civil War where you have a bigger state and let's say the South one, you'd have two states instead of one. And of course, when I talk about the U.S., it gets a little bit more confusing because we talk about the supposedly sovereign little things inside of the United States as states. But when I talk about states, it's nations. It's states with a capital S. And the other good thing to know is it really the end of the state? So Egypt gets conquered by Rome and is completely annexed. And for a long time, it's part of the Roman Empire. Then it's part of the Byzantine Empire. Then it's part of different caliphates across the Middle East. And then all of a sudden, there's an Egypt again. Is it just the same when it comes back in name only? Or is it really the same state as it was before but progressed through time? And that's really more of a philosophical question. I don't know if you can really answer that. You know, if you can really say, you know, like say Israel or Egypt, who were two countries that were gone for a long time who came back, if those are really new or if they're really just old things coming back, or if that really even matters is kind of up to you as a world builder. That specific one to me is something to think about because really it's all about thinking about new questions. And when you have new questions, you get more detailed worlds. And along with that, obviously, does it reemerge? Or in the state it was in, or in a different state? Is it quick? Is it we are subjugated by those pesky Canadians and then within 5 years we've regained our freedom? Who knows? Maybe that's what the story's about. It could very much be a state reemerging from an old state. The rating, I consider this a more of an intermediate. Now, the actual dates of the rise and fall are basic, but some of the stuff beyond this one are golden ages. Does the state come back? Does it come back in a different form? That becomes more intermediate. Also, as intermediate topics go, they're really more important if you want to tell stories going into the future of your world. The world building task for the day: track the rise and fall of the state that you worked on for your last episode. The major state in your work in progress. When did they come about? When did they decline? And if you want to go through some of those other tasks of golden ages, and does it come back after it falls? That's up to you. The real world task for the day: plan out your next world building actions for next week. Always have the next step, the next thing you want to get done. So if you're working on a book, what's the next thing I have to do for the book? That becomes my next task. If I'm doing world building for parts of a book, what things, I might have a larger list of what things I have to world build, but I want to think of what I'm working on next. And you can use these things to fill up your time when you have a free 5, 10, 20 minutes. And if you can just get 10 minutes, even if you're tired after work and you can just work for 10 minutes, sometimes you get the energy to work longer, or maybe you don't have any actual extra time, but you can look at your list of next actions and choose, is there something I can get done in this 10 minutes? The tease for the next episode is world building fantasy state history. And as always, make sure to go to gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at gardul.com, to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike, while the myth rolls high.